Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with author Gary K. Wolf. May I call you Gary, Mr. Wolf? How's that?
You can call me Gary, as I used to say, Mr. Wolf is my father. You can call me Gary, that's fine.
All right, sounds great. So folks out there might know a character that you have a hand in creating. You created this character. There was a movie once upon a time in the 80s, and that is Roger Rabbit out there. So that's out in the world.
You know, my
It
my finest creation, Roger, and of course my finest creation, Jessica.
hmm
Whenever I give a lecture or a talk or go anywhere, teenage boys bow down to me in homage, uh, thanking me for creating Jessica Rabbit. So,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Definitely iconic characters, and that is a book series.
yes.
Uh, and you also did you write the screenplay as well? You are a
I did
screenwriter.
not. No, I did not.
Oh,
I
okay.
wasn't writing screenplays in those days. I do now, but I didn't then. But yeah, it's now a four book series. I just wrote Jessica Rabbit Serious Business, serious with an X,
hmm
which is a Jessica Rabbit origin story,
Nice, nice.
which talks about how Jessica Rabbit came from her humble origins as a poor, not very attractive shop girl, and totally changed into the Jessica Rabbit we know and love today.
hmm
Also, where Roger came from, how she met Roger, where tunes come from, and where how Toontown came to be. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, the prequel, the origin story. I love it. I love
Yes, the origin story. Yes,
it.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So what was it about the written word, writing and authoring and creating that first attracted you
Well,
as a young author, young person?
so it started out as a young person. Started out when I was in the probably second or third grade, and my teacher gave the class an assignment. She gave us a picture. It was a picture of a typical farm scene. There was a farmhouse, a barn, a fence, a meadow, and a single cow all by itself out in the middle of the meadow. And she told us to take the picture home and color it. And the whole object of the lesson was to stay inside the lines. That was the whole object of the lesson. So
hmm
I took it home and I colored it. And I mean, there was nobody better at staying inside the lines than I was. So I colored it. And I colored the farmhouse yellow, which was the color farmhouses were around my town, a little town in Illinois. I colored the barn red, colored the fence brown, colored the grass green. Then I come to the cow. And my mother had always told me that when people were alone, that they got sad, they got lonely, and they got blue. I said, well,
hmm
works for people, must work for cows. So I colored the cow blue. And I handed it in the next day. The day after that, the teacher passed them all back, all except for mine. And she called me up to the front of the room and she says, Gary, turn around and face the class. And I said, oh my God, I stayed inside the lines better than anybody. And she
Uh,
held that picture up over my head and she pointed to it and she said, class, look at this stupid, stupid picture. She said, everybody knows that cows are brown, cows are black, cows are white. Sometimes cows are brown, black, and white, all three. She says, never, ever, ever are cows blue. That just never happens. She says, Gary, don't you
wow.
ever do anything that stupid again. So she called my mother, right? And my mother had to go to school, which was a big deal for my mother. And the teacher said to her, I think there's something wrong with Gary. I think he might need some psychological help. So that night, my mother and my father called me into the living room and they said to me, Gary, why did you color that cow blue? And I said, Ma, it wasn't me. It was you. You were the one that you told me that when people are alone, they get sad and lonely, they get blue. I figured true for people, must be true for cows. And so my mom says, you go outside and play for a while. Your dad and I have to talk about this. Now you have to realize that my mother and father were children of the Depression. My father had to drop out of school in the third grade to go to work.
Yeah.
My mother had to drop out of school in the eighth grade to go to work. So these were not what you would call well-educated urban liberals. I mean, these were hard scrabble working folk, and I really didn't know how this was going to turn out. So after about half an hour, my mom and dad called me back inside. My mom said to me, Gary, father and I talked about this, and we decided that the next time you want to color a cow blue, you go ahead and color a cow blue. And
Nice, nice.
I that was the first validation I ever had of my creativity. Of course, I've colored a lot of cows blue since then. And as an addendum, about a week later, the the teacher gave us another assignment. We were supposed to write what we did on our summer vacation. And
Hmm.
so, people wrote out, we went up to Wisconsin, to Wisconsin Dells. We went to Chicago to the museum. And I wrote about how I went out in the backyard and I used aluminum foil, tin cans, and string and built a rocket ship and flew to the moon. And he just passed that paper back and said, well, that must have been quite some vacation. And I never heard another word from her about it. But for early influences, um, I keep going back to my mother because she was a very wise woman, a very wonderful woman. And my mother told me, she said, if you want to get out of this town, which was 1,400 people, and she worked in the school cafeteria there, and my dad ran the pool hall, right? She said, if you
Hmm.
want to get out of this town and you don't want to wind up running your father's pool hall, she said, the one thing you can do to make that happen is to read. Just read, 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 read. And
Wow.
she got me my first library card when I was probably 5 or 6, and I had open access. I could go to the library by myself, walk there, get in however many books I wanted, bring them back and read them. And I read Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and all that kind of stuff. But what did I read? I read what kids read. I read comic books.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I would read every comic book. I would go to Andy Giles' B Street Smoke Shop, where they sold comic books and cigarettes. My other passion of my youth.
The
Um,
the two great virtues of youth, really.
the two great virtues of youth. Yes, and I would read all when they came in on Tuesday, the new ones, and I would read all I could before he kicked me out, and then I'd buy whatever was left with my allowance that I could afford. I'd trade them with other kids, and I grew up reading comic books, and and my mother never told me, "Hey, don't read those; it'll rot your brain." I mean, as long as I was reading, she was happy. So
Awesome.
my other great reading material of my youth or something that my father read. And he read what they call true crime detective magazines. And
Hmm.
I don't think those still exist. I hope they don't. They've probably been supplanted by reality TV. I don't know. But what these were magazines with stories and pictures, and they detailed real crimes,
Hmm.
always murders. And if you ever saw the Tom Hanks movie Road to Perdition, uh,
Hmm.
Jude Law played a photographer in there who would go to crime scenes and get there often before the police and rearrange the bodies so they were more photogenic. Um, and then take pictures to sell them to magazines who would print them in this kind of format. Um, his character was based on a guy named Ouija, who was an actual guy who did that. And I read those, and again, my mom never said, "Hey, don't read those; those are going to ruin you for life." But
Hmm. Hmm.
I grew up reading those, and luckily, I transitioned into a better genre of crime fiction. I found, Philip Marlowe, Mike Hammer, noir mystery writers, and so I grew up loving. Excuse me. I grew up loving comic books and noir mysteries, and
Hmm.
so years later, I became a real writer, and I was writing science fiction, and I got a four novel contract from Doubleday. They gave me a 4 novel contract based on my first novel, which was Killer Bowl.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they said, write whatever you want, we'll publish it, whatever you want. So I wrote Killer Bowl, I wrote A Generation Removed, I wrote The Resurrectionist, which were all hard science fiction. But for
Mm-hmm.
my fourth novel, I wanted to write something that incorporated the loves of my youth, which were, of course, comic books and noir mysteries.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so not an easy couple of concepts to put together, and I was searching for some kind of a premise, and I was watching Saturday morning cartoons uh, for research. I told my wife I was watching these for research, and I became transfixed, not with the cartoons themselves, which were pretty basic and not very interesting, but the
Mm-hmm.
commercials,
Mm.
because I saw cartoon characters like Tony the Tiger, the Trix Rabbit, Snap Crackle and Pop, Captain Crunch. Um, these were cartoon characters talking to real kids, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody seemed to think that was odd. And I said, geez, there's a great idea. What would you do if you had a world where cartoon characters were real? What kind of a world would that be? So I spent a year researching it. Just the conventions of comic books and cartoons,
Yeah.
what went on in all of them that would be really funny if they really happened in a real world. Um, and then I came up with my detective, Eddie Valiant, kind of the prototypical hard-boiled private eye. I named him Eddie after my father,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to thank my father for exposing me to all that great crime literature of my youth, and wrote the book. And I submitted it to Doubleday. And of course, this was the fourth book in my four-book contract, and first time in my writing career. I mean, I'd written hundreds of short stories and four novels, never had a reject, and Doubleday rejected it.
Oh, wow.
Uh, yeah,
Huh.
and um, so I called my editor. He said, Sharon, why did you reject this? I mean, this is clearly the best thing I've ever written. I mean, I'll never surpass this. And she says, yeah, I agree. She says it was funny. It was unusual. I've never read anything like it. But she said it was so different from anything you've written. She said it was so different from anything anybody's ever written that I had to send it to the marketing department. And they were the ones who rejected it. And okay, so I called the marketing department and I talked to the head of marketing at Doubleday, and I said, Chuck, why did you guys reject my novel? He says, oh, we all thought it was hilarious. We loved it. But he says, there's no category for it. It's not a regular mystery. It's not a regular adult novel. It's not a children's novel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fantasy. It's not really science fiction. There's no category for it. He said, hey, there's no place on the bookstore shelves for this book. I can't sell this book. I said, well, let me ask you, what would you do if somebody gave you Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz or Gulliver's Travels? What would you do with those? And he thought for a minute. He says, I couldn't sell those either. So I went
Wow.
back to my agent, and I said, Bill, I said, I'll be honest with you. If I can't sell this book, I don't want to be a writer anymore because this is what I want to do. I want to do this. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. He said, we'll find it a home. It's a great book. We'll find it a home. So he started sending it out to other editors, other publishers, sometimes different editors at the same publisher. And along the way, the book, which of course was Who Censored Roger Rabbit,
Mm-hmm.
um, it got 110 rejects. It was rejected 110 times by just about every publisher you can name. And a couple of publishers rejected it. A lot of publishers rejected it once. A lot of them rejected it twice. A couple rejected it three times. But my agent kept plugging away at it. And in those days, you used to get rejects. Email didn't exist, so you got them as a letter. It would come in the mail. And my wife used to call my trip out to the mailbox every day the daily disappointments, because I would go out and check the mail and come back with 5 rejects, and drink heavily for the rest of the night because I was so depressed. So submission 111 went to St. Martin's Press and to a woman named Rebecca Martin. And
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca had just published a major bestseller for St. Martin's Press. And so the president of the publishing company uh, gave her a vanity project. He said, "All right, for your next project, you can publish any book you want. Whatever book you feel like publishing, you can publish." And at that moment, Who Censored Roger Rabbit came across her desk. So of course, she read it, she loved it. All the editors loved it. There's always a marketing department that turned thumbs down. So she loved it. She went to the president of the company and said, "Here's the book I want to publish," and gave him
Mm-hmm.
Who Censored Roger Rabbit. So he said, "Okay, I'm going to take it home tonight, and I'm going to read it over, and I'll get back in the morning." So he took it home, came back in the morning, called her in his office, says, "Rebecca, I told you you could publish anything you want, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it." And Rebecca stepped up to the plate and said, "You know, publish this book or I quit."
Mm-hmm.
And so they published the book, albeit in very, very, very small quantities. I think less than 5,000 copies, which is, next to nothing. You do that nowadays on your home computer. Um, and people ask me sometimes, if you could go back and relive your life and do something different, what would you do if you had a time machine?
Mm-hmm.
I always say, if I had a time machine, I would go back to 1981 when that book came out, priced at $298, and I would buy all 5,000 copies, because now if you go on eBay, you can't find that book for less than $500. So I would
Mm-hmm.
have bought all 5,000 copies, put them in a barn somewhere, and now I'd be living in a castle in Spain. But anyway, they did buy the book, they did bring it out, and the rest was history.
Love it. I love it. I love the story of pushing categories, and the idea that this book didn't find traction because people didn't know quite where to categorize it. Like, such a powerful story.
Yeah, exactly right. And in fact, the movie had a similar problem. Um, I because of the conventions I used in the book. The book is not the movie story, and the book is the best book that I was capable of writing, and I used a lot of conventions in the book that, to me, even if I was thinking about it as a movie, which I definitely wasn't, but I didn't think this book was filmable,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
my characters, Roger, Jessica, Baby Herman, as cartoon characters, are actually comic book characters, and they speak in word balloons.
Hmm.
So when you talk to a tune, they put up a word balloon, and you don't talk to them, you read them. And if they turn around and their word balloon turns around, and you either have to learn to read backwards or you have to go around the other side of them. If somebody is killed with a tune gun, the gun produces a bang balloon, and those bang balloons are very brittle. They fall, and if they don't break, you can pick up the bang balloon, and then if you find a gun that you think is a murder weapon, you produce another bang balloon, and if the two bang balloons match, that's the gun. When somebody plays a tuned piano, the notes go drifting off into space, and people collect those notes and cut them into 8 by 12 sheets, and that's where sheet music comes from. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
so there's a lot of visual stuff that readers have to imagine,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I didn't think this would ever be a movie, but there was a 1 year period between when I sold the book and when the book came out. I sold the book in 1980. It came out in 1981, because that's how long it took to produce books in those days. And in that period, I got a call on my home phone, and I answer it, and the guy on the other end of the line says, "Is this Gary K. Wolf?" I said, "Well, yes, it is." He says, "Well, this is Roy Disney from the Walt Disney Company." I said, "Yeah, right. Well, Roy Disney calling me at home. That's rich. Who is this really?" "No, no, no. It's really Roy Disney, and I just read your book, and I wonder if you'd be interested in having the Disney company make it into a movie." That book hasn't even come out yet. How'd you get my book? Well, it turns out that somebody at St. Martin's, and I never found out who. I tried. I desperately tried, because I wanted to kiss her or him full on the lips. Uh, Somebody sent a copy of the manuscript to Disney and said, "We think
Wow.
you would really like this book."
Hmm.
And turned out they did. Um, that this was Disney in the 1980s, and they had a lot of reasons for buying this book. First of all, uh, they were in danger of becoming a second-rate movie production company. They had been offered Jaws, they turned it down. They've been offered Star Wars, they turned it down. They've been offered ET, they turned it down. They were making movies that were the second half of double features, of which there were no more. They
Hmm.
were making movies about the Nutty Professor and Flubber and uh, Black Hole and the Black Cauldron, which disappeared down the black hole. And
Hmm.
they needed something to reestablish themselves as a prime mover and shaker in the movie industry. And they saw this as being that movie. The other thing was, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but when you walk down any street in America or the world, you see a lot of people wearing sweatshirts, t-shirts, baseball hats with Disney characters on them. Disney
Hmm.
makes a lot of money off of apparel and stuff, and their current stable of characters back in 1980 was getting a little thin. Mickey Mouse had kind of become the corporate spokesmouse,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you couldn't really have fun with him anymore. He was wearing a tuxedo and tennis shoes, and you couldn't really screw around with him. You could have fun with Donald Duck, but nobody could understand what he said. So, that he was kind of off the table. So they saw Roger and Jessica Baby Herman as new characters that they could add to their stable of characters.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of reason for them to buy this book, and they frankly they offered me more money for it than I'd made for everything I'd written up to that point put together. So I said, yeah, sure, go ahead and try. And but I didn't really think it was going to be possible for them to make this into a movie. I just didn't think they could do it, especially given where they were at that time. And
Hmm.
for the first probably 4 or 5 years, they pretty much proved me right. They just could not pull it together. They tried doing live action animation combined, couldn't make it work. Didn't It looked horrible. And admittedly, a lot of the technology that we used in the movie did not exist in 1980 to 85. So uh, they were kind of rowing upstream on that one. And one day, Roy Disney came to me and said, we're not having any luck doing this live action animation. So, what would you think if instead of live action animation, we did it all live action and had the toon characters dress up in costume like they do at Disneyland? I'm thinking, oh Jesus, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have the Disney stable, and I'm gonna have Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant, Haley Mills as Jessica,
Hmm.
Dean Jones as the Rabbit, and Kurt Russell as Baby Herman. I said, don't you think that compromises the premise just a little bit? And yeah, I guess so. And, cooler heads prevailed when they went on. And they kept trying and kept failing. And I suspect they would have kept failing, except in 85, a couple of things happened. Roy Disney was kind of booted upstairs and was replaced by Michael Eisner.
Hmm.
Michael Eisner brought in Jeff Katzenberg, and the two of them had worked together at 20th Century and had produced a whole string of box office blockbusters. And they came in and they looked at the stable of movies that Disney had in production or in pre-production, and they threw them all out, all except for this one. Michael told Jeffrey, he said, "This is the movie we have to make. We have to make this movie, and I want you to make it and make it." So Jeff Katzenberg and Michael, of course, went out and they did something that nobody at Disney had ever done before. They hired an outside producer to do this movie.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Nobody at Disney had ever done that or even talked about it or even thought about it. And that was a little known guy named Steven Spielberg. Uh, so Steve Spielberg comes in, and actually Steve Spielberg had read the book when it first came out. Always thought it would be a great movie. Um, and to show you the difference that Steve Spielberg makes in Hollywood in 1983, 82, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers and said, "Hey, look, we're making this live action animated movie, and I'd like to I'd like to use Bugs Bunny as a cameo. He's going to walk on. He's going to say, "What's up, Doc?" Eat a carrot, walk off.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Warner Brothers said to Roy Disney, "Get lost. Get lost. There's no way that Bugs Bunny is ever going to be in a Walt Disney picture. That is just never going to happen." So 5 years later, Steve Spielberg walks into Warner Brothers and makes the identical request. "Hey, I'm going to use Bugs Bunny as a cameo." And Warner Brothers says, "Of course, of course. What about Porky Pig? What about Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner? What about Yosemite Sam, Tweety
Hmm.
Bird, and Sylvester? Take them all. Take them all. You know."
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and so Steven walked out with the entire Warner Brothers catalog of characters. The only codicil was that Bugs Bunny, being a superstar and co-equal to Mickey Mouse, had a contract. And in his contract, Bugs Bunny has to be in every scene with Mickey Mouse. You cannot have Mickey Mouse in a scene without Bugs. And they have to have the exact same number of words of dialogue. All right.
Interesting.
That's what happens when you're a superstar.
Yep.
And one thing that I just actually very recently found out, the Warner Brothers people, while they were forthcoming with their characters, were incredibly difficult to deal with for the animators, because the movie was set in 1946, and they insisted that they wanted all of the Warner Brothers characters to be the 1980, 86, 87 Warner Brothers characters, who
Hmm.
looked tremendously different from the Warner Brothers characters in 1946. If you look at 1946 Bugs Bunny, he looks nothing like he does today. He's totally different, as is Porky Pig, as are all of them. And the animators were just livid about this. They wanted to use the 1946 characters, so they made two versions.
Huh.
They made one version with the 1946 characters and one version with the 1986 characters. They showed the 1986 version to Warner Brothers, and they put the 1946 version in the movie. And Warner
Uh,
Brothers was not aware of that until the movie premiered.
oh wow.
Yeah, and Warner Brothers went ballistic. Oh my God, they wanted them going to sue, but then the movie grossed $1 billion,
Hmm.
and they suddenly, cooler heads prevailed over there, and they said, "Wow, we can start producing merchandise with the 46 characters on it as well as with the 1980 characters on it," and
There you
so
go.
they wound up being happy after all. But Steve Spielberg came in, and the first thing that he did was bring in a director, Bob Zemeckis, uh,
Hmm.
who had been offered the project in 1981 and had turned it down because he didn't think that Disney had the horsepower to do it. And of course, he was right. But now with Steve Spielberg at the helm, he said, "Well, yeah, I'll do it now." Um, and Bob Zemeckis brought in Kathleen Turner as the voice of Jessica Rabbit, because he had worked with her on *Romancing the Stone*, and I mean, the voice was perfect for Jessica Rabbit.
Hmm.
And when they were doing the scene, excuse me, when they were doing the scene where Jessica sings the song, um, Kathleen was pregnant at the time and couldn't sing. And whether Kathleen really can't sing or whether she just didn't have breath control because she was pregnant, I don't know. But Steve Spielberg said, "I don't worry about it." She says his wife Amy Irving was there in the soundstage when we were recording this, and he said, "Amy, as you sang it, Yentl, you give it a whack. Just sing the song." I said,
Hmm.
"Steve, nobody's going to believe that Jessica has one voice when she sings and another voice. Nobody will even notice." so Amy Irving sang the song, and Kathleen did it under the condition that she not get screen credit. She
Hmm.
didn't want to be screen credit because uh, this was early days, and like I say, just like when those marketing guys were saying, "And there's no category for this movie," nobody knew what this movie was going to be. Nobody knew if this was going to be a kids movie, an adult movie. Uh,
Hmm.
there was no category for this movie. This was not like any movie that had ever been made before, and they didn't know if this was going to be a massive hit or another Howard the Duck. I mean, So she said, "Well, I'll do it, but I don't want screen credit," which is what James Earl Jones did in Star Wars for the voice of Darth Vader. He did
Ah.
not take screen credit, so that if that movie, which was similar to this, and that nobody knew if that was going to be any good or even who was going to go see it, if that movie was a terrific flop, he would just fade into the woodwork. And if it was a tremendous hit, then he would come out. I was the mystery man who did the voice, and
Mhm.
uh, so Kathleen was going to do the same thing, and worked out actually worked out quite well for her. Uh, Stephen wanted to bring in a director of animation from outside Disney, somebody who was a world caliber animator to oversee the other animators. Disney really fought that. They said, "No, our animators are the best there are. They don't need." But Stephen, of course, won out, and they looked at Chuck Jones, who was the guy who did Bugs Bunny, and everybody wanted Chuck Jones to be the lead animator. I did. I was just a tremendous guy, a real gentleman. But he was 72 or 73 at the time, and they knew that this movie was going to go on for 5 years and was going to be a tremendous undertaking, a huge workload, and they were worried that the work might kill him, and so they decided not to go with him, even though he was willing to do it. Which is one of the first times in Hollywood, maybe the only time I've ever seen that Hollywood people have ever had any sympathy whatsoever the people who were making the movie. All right. So the next guy we looked at was Ralph Bakshi, who had done the X-rated Fritz the Cat movie.
Mhm.
Um, and Stephen thought he was kind of a goon. Um, so we passed on him. And I often wonder what Ralph Bakshi would have done with Jessica. I think that would have been a kind of a hoot to see. But they
Mhm.
finally settled on a guy named Dick Williams, who was an American living in London, expat, and he had won an Academy Award for the Pink Panther, and was animating a series of uh, animated cartoons for a beer company, a lager of some sort in England, and you can still see those on YouTube. The lead character is a cat who has 9 lives, and he always loses one of his 9 lives, risking it to get a beer.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he always gets the beer, but loses a life, and it's well worth it to him. And if you watch those on YouTube, um, you'll see that Dick Williams used a lot of the same gags and a lot of the same jokes that he uses in the movie. Uh,
Mhm.
so we had the voice of Jessica, we had the director. The guy that we really needed was somebody to play Eddie Valiant,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
he's the private eye, and he's the one that the audience is going to relate to, and he is the one that's going to have to convince the audience that these characters are real, the rabbit
Yeah.
is real. So everybody wanted Harrison Ford. We talked to Harrison Ford. He was willing to do it, but when he found out it was going to take 5 years, he said, "I can't do that." So we went to Paul Newman. Paul Newman was willing to do it, but same thing, I can't
Mhm.
give you 5 years. So we went to James Woods. Actually, Kurt Russell came in. Bill Peterson from, I think he's CSI. I think he would have been good, but none of them really clicked. And um, finally, uh, they found the perfect Eddie Valiant, and that, of course, was Eddie Murphy, right? So they hired Eddie Murphy, and they brought him in, and it became obvious. And they liked Eddie Murphy because he was bankable. People knew
Uh-huh.
who he was, and they would come to this movie uh, just to see Eddie Murphy. But it became obvious really early on that um, he was not going to work out, because he insisted on being funnier than the Toons. So we're rewriting the script to give Eddie Valiant more comedy, and it just didn't work out. So we got rid of him. He got bought out for $1 million out of his contract and went off, and we kept looking. In the meantime, over on the other side of Hollywood, um, Brian De Palma is making The Untouchables. And
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
really wants Robert De Niro for Al Capone. But Bobby De Niro is making another movie and can't isn't available. So he hired a British guy named Bob Hoskins to be Al Capone.
Uh-huh.
And a couple of weeks into the filming, Bobby De Niro calls De Palma and says, "Hey, I wrapped early. I could be Al Capone." So now Bob Hoskins gets spun out of his contract. So he's got $1 million, nothing to do. So we said, "Hey, somebody said, let's bring this Hoskins guy in, see what he can do." And I resisted. I said, "Oh, geez, he's not just British. I love the guy. I've seen him in The Long Good Friday and Mona Lisa. I thought he was a terrific actor. But I said, he's not just British, he's Cockney British. He's
Hmm.
got
Hmm.
strong British accent." I said, "There's no way he's going to convince anybody that he's a prototypical LA private eye." So Bob Hoskins came in and did a reading on a blank stage, nothing around him, did it in perfect Los Angeles accented American accent, and with nothing on the stage around him, convinced you that that rabbit was real.
Nice.
It was
Nice.
amazing. And so we hired him immediately. He did his scenes, and he was amazing. There were times when he was standing on an empty soundstage, green screen, making everything up in his head, the whole of Toontown, and you believed it. In the scene where, yeah.
There we go.
So Hoskins was standing on a bare stage, making everything up in his head. The scene where he's in Toontown, there's nothing there, and he's making that all up. To show you what an incredible job of acting he did in the scene where he is handcuffed to Roger Rabbit. Those handcuffs are on springs,
Mm.
a spring, and so he is not only controlling his arm, but he is controlling the rabbit's arm through the use of that handcuff on a spring. And um, the most important thing about what Bob Hoskins did was eye contact. He had to maintain eye contact at all times with the rabbit.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and there are very few, and I'm not going to tell you where because there are very few instances where he missed it. And you got to remember, there was no rabbit. I mean, that rabbit was not there. Uh, so he was just a consummate actor. And in the scene where he gets thrown out of the Ink and Paint Club by the gorilla, of course he's on wires, and he's lifted through. And at the end, they had to drop him under the boxes to collapse the boxes. So they drop him under the boxes. He broke 3 ribs, and everybody's saying, "Oh my God!" He went to the hospital. He said, "Oh my God!" Now we're going to have to postpone production for 3 months until Hoskins recovers. Came in the next day, all taped up.
Wow.
Yeah, let's go. And people are always asking me um, if I have any regrets about the movie. If there's
Hmm.
anything that I wish had been done differently, and I have one big regret: the fact that Bob Hoskins did not even get nominated for an Academy Award for what I thought was the most incredible performance I've ever seen done anywhere by anyone. And
Hmm.
I've analyzed it in my head, and I think the reason for it is that he just made it look too easy. Nobody realized just how hard what he was doing was.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
the other things that we had to do for the movie, of course, it was a book, and while I had seen Roger and Jessica and Baby Herman in my head, I had never actually drawn them because I can't draw. So I sat down with Dick Williams, and Dick Williams helped me visualize what Jessica, Roger, and Baby Herman looked like. Roger is pretty much as I described him in the book, except in the book he's a brown rabbit. And Dick Williams thought that a stark white rabbit would show up better on screen.
Hmm.
So I didn't have a problem with that. Dick Williams added the top knot, and then for his voice, we brought in a comedian named Charlie Fleischer.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And we had seen I had seen Charlie Fleischer on Welcome Back, Kotter, when he replaced Vinnie Barbarino, when he replaced Travolta, and I always thought he was hilarious. But I went to his comedy show once in L.A., and he did this routine where he did Donald Duck having an orgasm, and oh, I told Zemeckis, "You've got to come hear this guy." So we went and we asked him to do that routine, and he did that routine. I said, "That's Roger Rabbit. That's the guy that can do it." So he worked
That's
with
quite an
me,
audition.
quite an audition. He worked with me and Dick Williams, and came up with a basic voice. And then Dick Williams felt that every major cartoon character always had some kind of speech impediment. So Porky Pig with his stutter, and Sylvester the Cat with his lisp, and they all had some kind of a speech impediment. So they wanted to have something for Roger, and we worked around a lot. And then Charlie came up with a stutter on P, the please, and that worked. That worked really well. So we had what the characters looked like. Jessica was tough because I had based Jessica on the fantasy girls of my youth: Rita Hayworth, Betty Grable, Lana Turner, the Marilyn Monroe a little bit, and she was kind of an animated character named Red Hot Riding Hood, who had been drawn by Tex Avery and had been in a couple of cartoons, which are also available on YouTube: Swing Shift Cinderella and Wild and Wolfie. And if you look at those, you will see that Red Hot Riding Hood is Jessica's grandmother. She wears a short red dress, has her hair up in a bun, but the way she dances and the way she sings, it's Jessica Rabbit. And Jessica turned out to be the hardest character for the animators to animate, because they were used to animating dogs and ducks and chickens and geese and cows. And here they were being asked to animate not just a woman, but the essence of a woman, and they just couldn't bring it off. So Bob Zemeckis went down. We're filming in London because Steve Spielberg likes the food there. Go figure. No, they have a 3-story. Elstree Studios had a 3-story soundstage so that we could have the sets on the top story, the puppeteers who were manipulating the real objects on the second story, manipulating through holes in the floor, and then on the first floor were video monitors, and Bob Z would be down there looking at what was being filmed. And he had animators who were drawing over the video monitors so he could see how the two went together. That kind of a studio did not exist in the United States at the time. Does now, but it didn't then. So we filmed in London. But we went down to the London North End, whatever it was, where the strip clubs were, and hired a stripper and brought her back to the studio where we were filming, and put her in Jessica's red dress and had her walk the runway singing the song, mouthing the song and doing the Jessica walk and the Jessica strut. And then Bob Z had her take the dress off and do it again in bra and panties. And then he had her do it again naked, so that the animators could see what a woman looked like when she walked. And they for weeks after that, because animation's a very long, tedious, boring process. For weeks after that, you could hear the animators saying, "Wow, I've been here so long, I forgot what a woman looked like. Let's watch the film again." So movie took from 1985 to 1988 to make. Came out in 1988 in June. Actually, it's 35 years last month.
Wow.
And won 4 Academy Awards. I went to the ceremony, sat close enough to share to smell her perfume. The movie grossed $750 million that year, and has since far surpassed that. It's well over $1 billion now, and it's given rise to the Toontown Land at Disneyland, Disney, Tokyo Disney. Of course, there's tons and tons and tons of merchandise, just like Disney expected there to be. Um, and of course, kind of made my career. I am now known as the guy who created Roger Rabbit.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and if I die tomorrow, on my tombstone, if it says "Here lies Gary K. Wolf," he created Toontown. That'll be enough.
You've expanded the first book into a series.
Yeah,
Um,
the first book was "Who Censored Roger Rabbit." I then wrote a sequel called "Who Plugged Roger Rabbit," where
mhm,
I standardized on the four-piece stutter. Um, this was a little tough for me because um, the movie grossed the 750 million. So let's say 500 million people have seen the movie, and maybe 12 people had read the book, and 10 of them were my relatives. So people knew Roger from the movie and not from the book. So I was faced with a creative dilemma about whether to use the characters as they were in the first book or the characters as they were in the movie.
mhm,
And I didn't want to sell out and do a Disney version. I don't think the movie is a Disney movie. I think the movie is a dark noirish movie with some really serious overtones in it. But I didn't want to sell out and do a flat out Disney version and just ape the movie. So I did a kind of a hybrid in the
mhm,
sequel. Um, the characters have the ability to talk, although it's easier for them to use word balloons. So they frequently use word balloons instead of talking.
mhm,
Um, and then I came up with the third book, which is more like the first. It's darker. Um, no trace of Disney in it whatsoever. And then, of course, the fourth book is the Jessica Rabbit novel, which introduces Jessica, and I call it a woman's book because I had to be careful. An old guy writing a book about the essence of woman.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
I had to be careful. I didn't want to overly sexualize her. I didn't want to trivialize her. Um, I wanted her to be a strong-willed, can-do woman. And so all of my beta readers, I had many, many beta readers who were reading it while I was writing it and giving me comments. All my beta readers were women,
mhm.
and um, the uh, the response I got from them, and I got this over and over. Was, "Oh, Jessica Rabbit is exactly the kind of woman I've always wanted to be."
Ah,
So,
nice.
successful there,
Yeah.
and it's available now. It's on my website, Gary K. Wolf, GaryWolf.com. Somebody took the K and scooped me on it. It's GaryWolf.com. You can buy it there, and all my books are available there. But the second book sold to Disney uh, for the movies, and Who Plugged Roger Rabbit, and
Hmm.
of course that was as much of a roller coaster and still is as the first movie was. It comes and it goes, and
Hmm.
um, right now it's who knows where. Um, my sense of it is that the first movie made over $1 billion, and rule of thumb is that a sequel movie will make about three-quarters of what the original made,
Hmm.
and that the characters are still viable. People still know who those characters are, and when they do surveys in film magazines about which movie would you most like to see a sequel made, uh, the two that used to always come up were Pretty Woman and Roger Rabbit. But
Hmm.
Pretty Woman has pretty much dropped off the radar. But Roger Rabbit is still the number one movie that people would like to see a sequel. So
That
my
would be
guess,
good to see.
yeah, my guess is that sooner or later that will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my goodness, they just announced Tron 3, I think.
Yeah,
So there are
and
things out there
you
in
know,
development.
like Batman 18,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
Batman when when Roger Rabbit premiered, Batman premiered, I think either shortly before or whatever, and they were showing in the same theater. And I look back on it now and I say, geez, we're on Batman 22 and still Roger 1. We gotta really go here to catch up. But
Yeah.
uh, we'll get there sooner or later.
Oh, I'm sure. I am sure. Um, I'll make sure to link the website in the description on the
Yep.
podcast so that
Oh,
people
that'd be
can
great.
go and
Yeah,
check
make
out the
sure it's
books.
GaryWolf.com. It's,
GaryWolf.com by
yeah.
Gary K. Wolf. And your other books are there as well. You mentioned Killer Bowl
Yeah,
and
I've got Killer Bull and
Typical Day being one of
typical
those.
typical day. The big ones are Killer Bull. The early science fiction was Killer Bull, which when I go to a science fiction convention, I am known as the guy who wrote Killer Bull. They
Mm-hmm.
care less about Roger Rabbit. I'm known as the guy who wrote Killer Bull, which is a dystopian novel about sports is played in the future, where it's blood sport. You kill each other during the event, and in that one, which I wrote in 1976, I kind of predicted MMA, wrestling and boxing sports. I predicted the internet. I predicted the gas crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I predicted a whole bunch of stuff. The second one is A Generation Removed. The third one is The Resurrectionist, and all of those have gotten movie interest. And who knows? I mean, may well be movies on their own. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you're in great company there too. There are so many books out there that have been optioned. I'll get excited sometimes and see a headline that some Michael Crichton thing has been optioned, and then it's out there somewhere. So hopefully, some more of those
You know,
stories make their way.
yeah, it's like the 110 rejects. The fact that a movie gets optioned and is actually made, and it's not just made, but is made so well.
Hmm.
Roger Rabbit was just selected by the Smithsonian to be inducted into the greatest American movies of all time. I don't know what they call it, but it wasn't just that the movie got made; it got made to the finest degree. I mean, I can't think of a thing that you could do to make that movie better. It's just the perfect movie, and it still
Hmm.
holds up. I have a lot of friends, a lot of new friends, a lot of young friends, and they all want to watch the movie with me.
Yeah.
So I have seen that movie. I can't tell you how many times, but I watched it. The most recent time was just about a month ago, and it still holds up. I
Yeah.
mean,
Absolutely.
it's not dated. There's nothing in it that's dated. It still holds up. So
Yeah.
I'm happy about that. And I didn't do it alone. I had help, uh, but it was a movie where everybody who was involved in that movie was at the top of their game, and
Hmm.
they were all interested in making the best possible movie that they could.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um, I, I am convinced that if they did not have a deadline, if Disney hadn't said we have to release this movie um, on June the 22nd in 1988, I'm convinced they'd still be working on it today. I mean, they'd
Yeah.
still be making it better and putting in more gags and whatever. So
Yeah. So, great things come from blue cows.
great things come from Blue Cows. And
That's a great subtitle.
I'll give you one wrap up story. All right, one wrap up story.
Sure,
When
sure.
Steve Spielberg was getting the cartoon characters that he wanted to be in the movie, he wanted to make sure he got the Warner Brothers characters, but he wanted to make sure that everybody who was involved in the movie in a major way had his or her favorite character in the movie.
Hmm.
So Bob Hoskins was Heckle and Jekyll. Uh, Bob Zemeckis was the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. Dick Williams was Droopy. So Steve Spielberg made sure he went out and got all those characters. So he came to me and he says, "All right, what character do you want?" And I said, geez, Steve, I got Roger, I got Baby Herman, I got Jessica. I think I'm covered."
Hmm.
Said, well, he said, "We'll do something for you." He says, "We'll do something." So when you watch the movie, when Eddie Valiant goes into Toontown and he's going through the tunnel, and all of a sudden the curtain goes up and the birds are singing, and it's all sweetness and light. It's only 6 frames, which is 6 tenths of a second. But if you look to the left as he comes out of the tunnel,
Uh-huh.
you're gonna see a wooden fence, a brown wooden fence, a yellow farmhouse, a red barn, a green meadow, and a blue cow standing all alone out in the.
Ah, love it. Love it. That's awesome. That is so cool. There you go. Yeah. Well, I love the creativity. I love the story of 110 rejections that becomes this cultural phenomenon. And thank you for taking some time to share that and
Oh, it's my
share
great
of your
pleasure.
journey. Yeah. Yeah. Glad to share this out for folks. And as I mentioned, I'll link the website so that people can go read the entire Roger Rabbit.
The entire Yeah. I used to do a blog. I don't have time for it anymore, but you can read my life history on the website and probably find out more about me than you'd ever want to know.
Yeah, this started as a blog project, and then just in the past year, I've started doing audio and video. So great
And you
to
do it
share
well.
your.
It
Well,
was it
thank you,
was
thank you.
it was good. It was fun.
I try. Lots of fun here too. And again, thanks so much.
Okay, my pleasure.